What's up, class? My name is Brody Walls, and the topic that I chose for my ethnography paper is going to be music and production and kind of that world. That's the culture I chose because it is a culture. Um, you know, whether people think about it that way or not. You know, music production. You know, audio and all those types of things is a big culture, and I kind of chose this because I work at a church, and I work in the kids ministry area. I work with the kids. You know, that's where the area that I work in. But there's also plenty of different areas. There's the students, there's you know, the small groups, the life groups, and obviously a big part of it at my church is the worship, the music. And that's a huge culture. We have a very good team that does the music, that does the audio engineering and the sound and the instrumentation and all of that. And to me, it's a very fascinating culture because it's so obviously amazing what they do, and week in and week out, the worship that they put on each Sunday, and for other events as well. They do such a fantastic job, but it's very interesting to think about. Okay, like there's so much work that goes into this, that goes into them being able to put on this worship every week, and get ready for the Sunday and the events that they might be doing to prepare for that. And so that's kind of the culture that I decided to study and dive into for this paper, for this project. And there's a couple things I'm gonna be looking at and focusing on, and some of the things of like what makes this culture a culture. Um, there's very like I said, there's a lot of different areas and parts of ministry in different churches. And in my specific church, like I said, there's all these different cultures. So I think within Christianity, which is a culture within the church, which there is a specific culture with church, I think as well, in those different areas, and in those different parts of of church, and of the ministry as a whole, there is specific cultures. And I think um, what makes the music, because music production, all these things is a culture in and of itself. And so just adding this, you know, within a church setting, within a worship setting, um, I think that's what I'm doing here, and that's what I'm going to be focusing on. And I think one of the things it talks about is what kinds of things in this culture are not important. And I think that's very interesting, to also be able to dive into like what's not important about this culture, because there's a lot of things from the outside in that from the outside that I say, okay, that pretty much a lot of it that I think of it is very important. So it'll be interesting to dive into that culture, to explore it, and kind of figure out, okay, what's not as important. What are the things that need to be focused on more than others? For me, I don't really know that. Like I said, I'm not part of this culture specifically, but it'll be very interesting to dive in and see, okay, what's the priorities? Okay, like what do they focus on the most, and what can kind of get put on the back burner a little bit? What can kind of be seen as not as important within this um, culture? And then like thinking about it, what does it feel like to be on the outside? Um, it definitely, it's awesome to be able to worship, and to be able to be a part of worshiping with the band on stage. But I think I do think it's interesting when you're a part of that, when you're behind the scenes. I think it very much shifts your mind, of the music and of the worship experience as in some way, and I'm interested to talk to some people about how that works, because I'm sure I know it definitely changes your mindset a lot, and it makes you see a lot of different things. So that's another thing I'm very excited to dive into. But I'm super excited to do this and to write this paper, and um, you know I'm very excited, and I think it's going to be awesome. And I'm excited to see the rest of the classes topics and what their papers are going to be about. And I think this is a cool thing, and it's going to be great overall. But anyways, that's all for mine. That's all for my ethnography paper and topic. I'll see you guys later.